How you doing, guys? This is Eric from WorldOfWasteland.com. In this video, I'm probably going to have to talk a little bit weird and a little bit stilted because of the subject matter. And I had a recent video, which I'm not even going to say the title because I have suspicions that the subject gets pretty quickly tanked in the algorithm. Let's just say it was the last one of the 30 Days of Preparedness, one with Alexandra Daddario on the thumbnail. So, which even in that shameless clickbaiting couldn't get me above my average video views, but I really do think it's because of the subject matter. So I'm going to use as much very coded language as possible in this video, so it might come across pretty weird and goofy and stilted, but we'll see if that happens to make any difference. But this video is going to be about, let's just call it the NYC incident in which a young man was demised by another individual with a Sharpie thingy, and what we can learn from that, and although kind of a lot of weirdness and bizarre thought processes that come up when talking about incidents like this. So for those of you who don't know, I'll try to put some links to maybe news articles about this incident so you can catch up. But it was a late night encounter with a probably on drugs, probably mentally disturbed individual, and there was a lot that can be learned in terms of, what word should I use? Maintaining your personal bubble and the aliveness inside it when out in this crazy world that I think is becoming very, very rapidly more crazy when it comes to this type of incident. We're seeing people in a lot of these very liberal enclaves, which is what this was, with very liberal people, to the extent that the person's girlfriend and friends are saying that he wouldn't even be mad at this person and would think he was a victim of the system. Oh, that's some cuckery right there. But it's getting everywhere. It's getting everywhere to where even the people who, the NIMBYs, the not in my backyard people who are always supported these policies because it affected everywhere else, are now coming face to face with this stuff themselves, like with all the immigration issues in New York City and whatnot. They're starting to have to face this stuff in their own backyards, and it's getting really bad in some of these really expensive cities. And for the most part, especially in a lot of these really expensive cities. And the quote-unquote bad parts of town are no longer, restrained or contained to a very small area, because they've always just kind of butted right up against the really nice parts of town. So it doesn't take much for people who are looking for someone they can prey upon to move outside of these areas. But so we're seeing a lot of people talk about this particular incident and lessons that can be learned from it. And there's a couple things that specifically that I wanted to talk about that I've seen come up multiple times with relations to this incident. The main one is people specifically referencing the so-called 21-foot rule and how this relates to your own force multiplier tools in the face of a Sharpie pointy thingy at distances 21 feet or less. And I've seen this very, very often misapplied. People are getting a very, very strange messages from, or like conclusions, let's say, from this kind of rule, or from the experiments that spawned this rule. And for those of you who don't know, it's basically saying that this was done with police officers who had their force multipliers holstered, and the person with the Sharpie pointy thingy was 21 feet away. And they said at least the average man with the Sharpie pointy thingy can cover that distance, that 21 feet or less, faster than the officer can get their force multiplier out and utilize it on target. But people are learning the entirely wrong message from that. I think the most common kind of logical disconnect or incorrect conclusion that people reach with this is they see that, and then in their mind it becomes this rock, paper, scissors thing where at under 21 feet, rock beats scissors. Or in this case, scissors beats rock. Which is just not the case at all. So we're going to give you some multiple choice here. Is it A, that your force multiplier is useless under 21 feet? Is the correct conclusion that crackheads are really, really fast? Is the correct conclusion that you should practice quick draw? Or do you think that maybe, just maybe, the conclusion that you should draw from this information slash rule is that if you see a Sharpie pointy thing, have your weapon out of its holster right away. Do not wait for them to charge you. That's what I think is the lesson that can be seen from all this. And even in the situations where you don't have your force multiplier, the point is that once you see a Sharpie pointy thing or anything else similar in the hands of someone who might be an antagonist, there's certain things you have to do at that moment. You shouldn't wait and say, okay, now whatever else needs to happen. You have to treat it that, like I said, in 1.5 to 2 seconds or whatever, they could be upon you, whatever. The good thing is that specific situation where someone is just 21 feet away and just instantly goes into full sprint to come at you is relatively rare. But as you can see in the video, it involved a lot of jawing. It involved, being in close, letting the person get into the personal bubble multiple times when they may or may not have known they had the Sharpie pointy thingy. And so those were all bad news, but the person never did just blast out, charge in full speed. And luckily that's relatively rare. So you usually will have a little bit more time than that. But even if you don't, the lesson is still the same. As soon as you see the Sharpie pointy thing, get your own full force multiplier in a position where you can use it and you don't have to engage it first. You wouldn't just be like, oh, I got to keep an eye on this guy. Like, no. You now know this is a situation where they can cover that ground and harm you really, really quickly. So you need to get eliminate as many steps of the OODA loop as possible, as quickly as possible, before they have a chance to do that. The second thing that I think we can very easily learn from this video is that the creating distance in ways other than just using your hand. People talk always about running. That's not necessarily the best plan, because first of all, this guy might be much, much faster than you. In the video, this individual was there with his significant other, who if he just sees the Sharpie pointy thing and decides to turn around and bolt out of there, she's not even going to know what he's doing, may not even follow him, may be like, what's going on? There's all sorts of reasons why that might not be an option. Leaving should be an option, but it doesn't mean you just straight up turn around and bolt out of there. As soon as you see a person that raises this risk profile, you should look to get out of the situation, but not just necessarily running away. But creating distance in general is incredibly important, especially when it's at that situation where they are closing the gap and they seem intent on actually using the Sharpie pointy thing. And the worst thing you can do is just like post your arms. I guess it's not the worst thing you do. You could just do nothing. But it's ineffective because, first of all, your reach may not exceed theirs. The implement that they have will extend their reach, and you can still get very, very injured, and it doesn't do anything to change the balance of power, to increase force multiply for you, to decrease their ability to cause you any bad outcomes, etc., etc. So one thing that I think people should always have in their repertoire mentally and should physically drill it are various kinds of kicks. And most people, I know the first thing you're thinking is, this isn't a movie, because all they envision is kicking Sharpie pointy thing out of somebody's hand, doing a backflip, doing a Van Damme split kick, or a Walker Texas Ranger roundhouse. Those are very specific types of kicks. And yes, I don't expect anyone or suggest that anyone do any of those kinds of kicks. What I'm talking about are three very specific types of kicks that are incredibly good at creating distance, incredibly easy, relatively speaking, to perform without knocking yourself off balance. And those specifically are the teep kick, the front kick, and the various kinds of side kicks. And those are probably in the increasing order of complexity and or difficulty. So the teep kick is also just known as a push kick. It's used very often in Muay Thai and kickboxing, and it literally is used specifically for creating distance. And it can be done as an actual strike to someone's solar plexus that can, hurt or disable them. But for the most part, it's used as a range control kick. And I'll try to splice in some videos how it's used. But if you think about it, it's a very natural movement that you would use if, this is a goofy example, but if your buddy was bending over at the edge of the pool and you wanted to launch him in, you wouldn't just full on strike him in the butt. You would basically just do the kick to where at the very end you're pushing with the ball of your foot. Or if you wanted to just literally push over a motorcycle or something heavy like that, to where you brace in your back foot, and then at the very end of the kick you would just end up kind of making contact and then just pushing the rest of the way. And the good things about that is it's very difficult to be knocked off balance, even if you miss or if they push back against you. Once you practice it a little bit, you can easily get into a position where the worst thing it's going to do is, if you completely whiff, is you'll just step forward onto that lead foot. And even if they push back against you, they're going to have, most of the time you're not going to be caught off balance. And you're not required to kick way above your waist, so it requires a lot less flexibility than any of these other martial arts types kicks. And it's extremely effective for that at creating distance. And most people are way not ready for it, way not expecting it. And especially if you add in any sort of little to where people think that something's coming at their face, hands go up a little bit, blast them right. You want to go right under the rib cage is like the perfect spot. But anything basically between the genitals and the chest is enough to knock someone over. And then if you see that person fall over, maybe you'll get super lucky and the Sharpie pointy thing will fly out of their hand. Maybe you decide you need to then engage your own force multipliers, or at that point then you can say, hey honey, let's get out of here, and work at creating some real distance. And you can, if you've watched any sort of UFC or martial arts, you can see how these types of kicks can be very extensive or can be very effective against even other trained martial artists. So of course, any move has counters, but it's not like something that, maybe you've come up upon Ernesto Hoost, who's down on his luck and has started a serious crack binge or whatever. But for the most part, people who have drilled, unless people have drilled extensively with kickboxing, and even people who've done a little bit of it, are not just going to have an immediate counter queued up when they're out of their mind that's going to take you out. And if you're up against a wielding XK1 champ who's also drugged up, then maybe you are just in for a bad night. Second to the teep kick is the front kick, which is very similar in your positioning, but it's more of an actual kick. Usually you do have to be a little bit more flexible because you're kicking more upward than you are pushing forward, but the target's the same anywhere from the lower abdomen up into right under the rib cage. You can front kick someone to the face, but again, that requires a significant amount of flexibility and is much more likely to have you caught off balance. So I would target just the breadbasket, and it's more just kicking right up. I'm not going to get into the detail. I'm not an expert on kickboxing. If you want to go into the details of the mechanics of a front kick, there's plenty of videos to be had all over YouTube on that. But it's one that can be very effective and is still not very likely to catch you off balance and doesn't require anywhere near as much, training or flexibility to do at a decent level compared to, roundhouse kicks, axe kicks, wheel kicks, stuff like that. So it can be drilled at home with it as a basic, or in a lot of basic gyms, without you needing to be some insane martial artist. You can get pretty decent with it. The next one is the side kick, and of these three, it's probably the one that you can put the most power into. People like Bruce Lee were famous. I know he was a movie star, but he's also a legit martial artist, and he was known for having insanely powerful side kicks. Same thing in the UFC, you can see lots of fighters who are able to knock people over with them, and it requires more mechanical, skill and kind of technique than the other two to do properly, but it's the most powerful of the three, and it's still not one that requires an insane amount of flexibility or drilling compared to a lot of other types of, Taekwondo or Muay Thai kicks. And because you're still targeting chest and stomach level at the highest, you're still doing it from a position that's very unlikely to knock you off balance. And the good thing about all these kicks is that if you're encountering a Sharpie pointy thing, in a normal attire, for most people, the most protected part of their body is going to be their foot because of your shoes. Of course, it's still possible that anywhere on your leg could be injured by the implement, even through the shoe and whatnot, but still, a rubber or leather shoe, rubber sole with leather upper, whatever, even synthetic, it's still the thickest material on any part of your body in most scenarios. Unless you're just getting off a motorcycle or something, then that's still the most protected part of your body, and it's still the longest part of your body. But then it's the easiest way to put the maximum amount of distance between your vitals and this implement with at least some protection. Your hands are usually not going to have anything on them. So yes, you can get poked straight through the bottom of most normal shoes, but it's still better off trying that than you are with just doing something that has a much lower chance of working and has no protection at all. So if you practice your side kick and get good at it, you can really lay someone out or send them flying across the bus stop. But as always, the lesson is, like I said, to get proficient in all forms of physical ability that pertain to this subject, and make sure you are flexible enough to perform even these moves, because it's not a given. They don't require nearly the amount of flexibility that it takes to do a lot of other martial arts techniques, but they still require a decent amount of flexibility, a decent amount of strength and speed and everything. So you definitely want to practice it, but you have a couple moves that will be very, very useful in this situation. And then if your Super Bruce Lee sidekick sends them straight through the bus stop TV advertisement or whatever, and they still get up with the Sharpie pointy thing, then it might be time to let them solve the riddle.
The riddle of steel.
So appreciate you guys sitting through my experiment in avoiding terminology that may be offensive to the algorithm. So we'll see if it worked. And let me know what you guys think on the subject regardless of that. Let me know what you think about my attempt, if I missed anything anywhere. And let me know what you think about my observations and what observations you've had about this. And of course, a caveat is I'm not an expert in this subject, but I have participated in a little bit of martial arts myself, and it's definitely something that, especially us non-experts, need to be thinking more and more about as our country descends into interesting times. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll talk to you soon.